Thank you for visiting the YouTube channel for bestbiblecommentaries.com. In this video, I'd like to show you the Daniel volume by James Montgomery Boice. Before I do, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this channel so you can see videos on Bible commentaries, study Bibles, and other resources that help people understand God's Word. Pastor James Montgomery Boice is the author of the Daniel volume in the series called An Expositional Commentary. This volume was published in 1989, and it is 136 pages in length. James Montgomery Boice, if you're not familiar with him, was the pastor of 10th Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That's probably the ministry position that he was most known for. He was also known for being the founder and former president of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. He was a prolific author. He wrote commentaries. He also wrote books on Christian doctrine and theology, and he wrote books on Christian living. He was evangelical, conservative, and reformed. James Montgomery Boice passed away in the year 2000. This series, called an Expositional Commentary series, most people just know it as James Montgomery Boice's Commentaries, is the fruit of his preaching ministry. So the content in each volume is rooted in his sermon manuscripts. They've been edited for the format of a book, the presentation format of a book. But they are the fruit of his preaching ministry. So these volumes, the target audience would be pastors, but also Sunday school teachers, small group leaders, Bible study leaders, even for individual studies. That would be the target audience for this particular series. I would call the commentary, all the commentaries in this series, introductory. But as I explained in other videos, introductory doesn't mean lack of substance. Introductory is in relationship to mid-level commentaries and technical commentaries that approach the text in a different way or deal with the text in a slightly different way. So an introductory commentary is typically a passage-by-passage explanation of the text, and that's the case in this volume, and usually doesn't deal with issues surrounding original language, textual criticism, manuscript discussions, textual variants, those kind of things that are more reserved for the mid-level to technical commentaries. There are about a dozen different biblical books in this series, so you're not going to find every book of the Bible in this particular series. The John, for example, is 5 volumes in length. Romans is 4 volumes in length. Genesis and Psalms are 2 volumes in length. Genesis and Psalms are 3 volumes in length. Matthew is 2 volumes in length. And then there's about a half a dozen that are a single volume in length. Daniel, Nehemiah, Acts, Philippians, and there's a few other volumes as well. Let me give you an example of the layout and the content and the commentary. I chose Daniel 5, verses 1 through 31. The title is Belshazzar Gave a Party. The English text is from the NIV translation. And then there is an introduction to start, and it reads like a sermon introduction, because again, this is the fruit of Boice's preaching ministry. So usually the main idea or the dominant theme of the text is found in the introduction, and then he proceeds with a passage-by-passage explanation. Now, just because it's passage-by-passage doesn't mean there is no exegesis of verses or key phrases. There is. They're just usually reserved for key verses rather than every verse. There is also application found throughout a section in this commentary. It's not just found at the end, but it's found throughout, because that was Boice's preaching approach to preaching. So, for example, in this section called Sin and Judgment, he says, first, sin is not static, and he gives an explanation. Second, sin makes us impervious to danger, and he gives an explanation. Third, God is not static, and he gives an explanation. So there's relevancy and application found even in the middle of a section. And then how it ends sounds very much like a sermon. You must trust him. You must turn from unrighteousness. Will you? There is no better time to do it than right now. And I imagine after that, he prayed or something, because that was a sermon. Okay, so what about reviews? I like to give academic reviews because most people have access to looking at other kinds of reviews online, but not everybody has access to academic reviews. So that's what I like to concentrate on. However, in all my searching, I could not find any academic reviews on this volume, and that sometimes happens with introductory level commentaries. Sometimes the academic journals aren't, to be honest, they're just not as interested in some of the introductory level commentaries. So, but I do have an example. I'd like to give you example from eschatology, because half of the book of or the second half of the book of Daniel, so the second half of this commentary, eschatology comes up frequently because of Boice's understanding of the text. So I said before that Boice was evangelical, conservative, and reformed, and we can add to that he was premillennial. So in Daniel chapter 9, verses 1 through 27, he discusses the 70 weeks, and I thought I would just give an example of his teaching on that. Not all commentators are cordial toward other eschatological positions. I would say that Boice is, and in this passage, he begins by referencing when he says Calvin, he's referring to John Calvin. He says, at this point, Calvin, who has his own system of calculating the earliest years in order to come up to the days of Jesus Christ, departs from strict chronology and regards the final scene years as symbolic of the works of Jesus generally. He regards putting an end to sacrifice in the middle of the 7 as a way of talking about the resurrection. Well, it may be so, but I tend to think those people are right who see a break in the fulfillment of prophecy at this point. According to them, the fulfillment of this uniquely Jewish prophecy is suspended while the gospel is preached to the Gentiles and the number of the church is brought in, a church encompassing people from all walks of life, all races, and all nations. Then, after the members of the church are fully gathered, the prophecy will begin to unfold once more with a final week of acute suffering and persecution for the Jewish nation. In this view, the last week of Daniel would coincide with a 7-year period of great tribulation mentioned elsewhere. I think there is support for this in Jesus' reference to the abomination that causes desolation, mentioned in Daniel 9, as well as in Daniel 11 and 12, as something not to happen immediately, but to be experienced at the end of the age. Matthew 24. So, that paragraph is a real clear indication of how the eschatology of James Montgomery Boice. I hope this video has been helpful to you in understanding more about this volume. Thank you for visiting Best Bible Commentaries. I'll put more information in the description box down below.